All right, rejoining us, and it's been some time since the last time he was on, is retired Vice Admiral Ted Slapshot Carter. Remind folks of some of the highlights of Slapshot's career. He was a CO at every level, including the USS Carl Vinson, the Enterprise Carrier Strike Group. He was president of the Naval War College, superintendent at the Naval Academy, and is now the president of the University of Nebraska. So, sir, you're very busy. Thanks for taking some time out. How are you?
I'm good, Mooch. Great to be with you again. I got all dressed up for you today. You're actually getting a look at my office here in Lincoln, Nebraska.
I got dressed up for you, too. I actually wore a collar. And as regular
nice.
viewers know, I'm either wearing a hoodie or a T-shirt. In a previous episode called Tomcat at War, we talked about the Kosovo campaign, and that was your CO tour at VF-14. So let's set the scene by talking about the airplanes you had and how you used the Lantern system during that campaign.
Yeah, so the scene setter here is we're talking 1999. We had planned with CAG-8 aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt to go to a Middle Eastern deployment. And then Kosovo broke out. We left in late March of 1999, made best speed across the Atlantic, 4 days to cross the Atlantic, and then to engage into the Kosovo conflict, NATO call sign Allied Force, in April, May, and early June of 1999. So 55 days of combat, the only aircraft carrier involved. The Air Wing was comprised of two F-14A squadrons, VF-41, our sister squadron, and my squadron, VF-14, the Top Hatters, the oldest continuous operating squadron in the Navy. These were F-14As that had some new toys in them. The Lantern, as you depicted, relatively new weapon system, kind of a strap-on or a Velcro system put on the F-14. I think it worked in some cases a little bit better with the B and the D model, but it worked great in the A too. Our airplanes that we had were all over 25 years old. I had one airplane that was actually just under 30 years old. So these were F-14As older than my youngest pilots. And the Kosovo conflict for us was 55 days of combat, started on April 6th, and then ended along with our Air Force counterparts.
This episode is sponsored by Bespoke Post, a monthly membership club delivering a box of awesome, top-shelf goods from under-the-radar brands. Every month, they introduce their members to cool new products, outdoor gear, barware, home and kitchen goods, clothing, and more, even live oysters, based on a preference quiz you fill out. It's free to join, and you can skip a month or cancel at any time. 90% of the products come from small brands, many of them based here in the U.S. And every box of awesome has around $70 worth of goods inside, but costs you only a small fraction of that value. A couple of my favorite boxes that I've received lately are the garment box, with this amazing hanging bag that folds up into a conveniently sized satchel, and the parked box, with this super comfortable chair that fits into this little bag. You'll get a box of awesome assigned to you, and before it's shipped, you'll get a chance to preview what's in that box, where you can decide whether you want to keep it, swap it for a different box, or skip that month entirely for no charge. You only pay for what you want. To get 20% off your first box of awesome, click the link in the episode description below and enter WardCarroll20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/WardCarroll20.
What's interesting about this deployment, and I don't know that a Navy aircraft carrier and its fighter squadrons has done this before or since, we packed up, drove through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, up into the Strait of Hormuz and into the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf. And we went into 33 days of combat, not often talked about, at the tail end of the no-fly zone in Iraq. And that's the scene here that we're going to talk about.
So remind anybody who's seen Top Gun Maverick of that briefing scene where Maverick talks about the 2 consecutive miracles required for this mission.
The first pair will breach the reactor by dropping a laser-guided bomb on an exposed ventilation hatch. This will create an opening for the second pair. That's miracle number 1. The second team will deliver the kill shot and destroy the target. That's miracle number 2.
So what you're talking about here is the real consecutive miracles mission that you guys did there in Operation Southern Watch.
And just to remind the viewers, when we're talking about a consecutive miracle tactic, we're talking about delivering two penetrator weapons, one separated from the other at some period of time to get to a deeper penetration than you could do with a single weapon. I mean, that's the basic tactic. It was used to some degree by the Air Force with slightly larger weapons during Desert Storm. To my knowledge, I don't know of a Navy squadron that had utilized this. We didn't do it during Kosovo. And this was the first day of operations from the Arabian Gulf to go into Iraq. And this was going above the no-fly zone line, going into Al Asad Airport, not too far from Baghdad, to take out a command bunker.
So let's talk about the different sizes of weapons that we used on the Tomcat, the GBUs, because we use the term GBU 24, GBU 10 sort of freely. Let's give the audience a quick primer on what those various weapons are and what is the payload, particularly of the GBU 24.
The Tomcat, the F-14A, again, somewhat limited by having to come back and land on an aircraft carrier. So we never took off with anything that we couldn't land with. We could carry 4 GBU 12s. Those are the 500-pound laser-guided weapons. We could carry 2, sometimes 4 GBU 16, the 1,000-pound laser-guided bombs, or 2 GBU 10s, which were the 2,000-pound bomb bodies. Now, when it comes to the GBU 24, it's a different class of paveway weapon. This is a paveway 3, and the difference is it's got a different seeker head on it, and it's got a wing module to it. This is a huge weapon, and it's actually depicted in the Top Gun movie. It is the actual weapon that they show loaded on the F-18 Super Hornet. Now, we could have carried 2, but to come back and land with 2, you'd had to land at like a fuel state of less than 3.0 on the fuel gauge. So we never carried more than 2. We always carried just 1. To give the audience an idea of how big this weapon is, it is the size of a small airplane. It comes off the jet, and it's about 14.5 feet long with a wingspan of 6.5 feet, and it weighs just under 2,500 pounds. So this is a big piece of gear. And before we get too far in this story, I want to give a shout out to every ordnanceman that was on that deployment on the Theodore Roosevelt, from the F-18 squadrons to our Tomcat squadrons. We had almost no hung weapons the entire deployment, 55 days in Kosovo, 33 days in Iraq. Quite an extraordinary performance by the ordnance and, of course, all the folks that worked on the flight deck.
We have FLIR footage of this actual mission, but walk us through how this went down.
So as we were going into the Strait of Hormuz, we got special permission that actually came from the White House to go after this target. And there were a few other targets there, but what was unique about this, and it came down from the Admiral, who was Mad Dog Copeland, who had shot down a MiG in Vietnam. He was our strike group commander, through our Air Wing commander, Captain Sparky Lyle. The F-14 got the mission. And I had led quite a few missions. I had probably just under 100 combat missions that I had flown, mostly in Kosovo at this point. So I got tasked with putting together the plan for this. And what was unique about this was it was a 2-airplane strike, and I could handpick the crew. And as you and I know, that doesn't happen. And I was allowed to not only handpick my crew, but allow the commanding officer and the executive officer to fly on the same mission if I chose to. And in this case, I did. So I, as the commanding officer, flying in the back seat with my favorite combat pilot, Lieutenant Commander Scott Scooter Moyer, a 2-time Blue Angel pilot. I selected Sam Richardson, call sign Slammer, who was my executive officer, to fly the lead airplane. And I picked who I jokingly talk to all the time, the second best Rio in our squadron, Del Bull, call sign Snapper, who had a tremendous amount of A6 background, and Snapper was an exceptional weaponeer and radar intercept officer, weapon systems officer. So we had arguably an all-star cast for this mission.
We'll remind the viewers that Slammer has been on the channel before, a couple of years ago, talking about his flat spin, that he had another guy who's been on the channel a few times, Nasty Manazar. in the front seat. This was a RAG FAM 1 tactics hop. So if you haven't seen that episode, check it out. But just want to remind everybody who's a fan of the channel that that name should be familiar to you. So this is an all-star team. You know, you've rattled off 3 and 4 names of guys who were community icons.
I'm going to take it up to another level. Del Bull was the son of Admiral Lyle Bull, who the movie Flight of the Intruder is his inspirational flight going downtown Haiphong with questionable permission, kind of one of those court-martial or Navy Cross. He was a recipient of a Navy Cross. So this is a family legacy. And I will tell you, Snapper lived up to his dad's legacy. He was an amazing naval officer as well as a really great tactician.
And Del also went on to make flag rank. I guess he finished up as Sinatra, the Chief of Naval Air Training. So fantastic guy. As you said, A6 pedigree, so he's familiar with the strike arena. It was great to populate the Tomcat community as the A6 went away and we got into air to mud, including precision strike capability, to have the A6 guys in the mix.
Yeah. So the mission and the reason we were tasked with this mission is the Iraqi Air Force was making a number of incursions or penetration events south of the no-fly zone. So it was determined that we would, try to deter them from doing that by taking out one of their major air command centers, which was just outside of Al-Assad. The target was a deeply rooted bunker. This thing was about the size of a football field, covered with somewhere between 60 to 80 feet of concrete, sand, and rocks. Very, very difficult to get into. And we did our own weaponeering, unlike our Air Force counterparts. Myself and Del sat down. We thought through this. The 4 of us sat down. We really put a lot of thought in this. We had remarkable blueprints of what this thing was designed, so we knew exactly what we were dealing with. We also knew that we would be met with surface-to-air weapons going into this. We weren't too sure about whether we were going to have an air-to-air threat, but all this came down to the fact we were going to do this with 2 jets, 1 GBU-24 per Tomcat, air-to-air weapons loadout, no Phoenix, but 2 Sparrow, 2 Sidewinders, and we were almost at max gross weight when we took off. This was a long flight. We were, not quite up into the corner inside the Arabian Gulf. We required refueling, and we determined that the best way to get inside this bunker was to use the consecutive miracle tactic. Now, in this case, and this is what's interesting in the movie, they talk about flying welded wing. They did not show in the movie what a really welded wing formation looks like. We flew 100 miles to get to this target, separated by 6 inches, 2 Tomcats that only a Blue Angel pilot could really do. And this was Scooter Moyer's skill set. I was literally sitting, underneath the wing of Slammer and Snapper's airplane as we were now making our way to the target. The tactic we were going to use was a single GBU-24 separated by a very exact amount of time. That might be somewhat classified, so I won't say what that exact amount of time was. But the reason we were flying welded wing is we needed both weapons to be the exact same wind stream in weather conditions so that we could achieve that exact time separation. The first weapon was to go into the center of the bunker with the right time separation to actually open up the seams of this building, for which we had, obviously the details of. And then my weapon that I delivered was to go through the 3 square meter vent, which is exactly what they show in the Top Gun movie. And in fact, the real thing looked almost exactly like that in our overhead imagery. And we were going to deliver these weapons from almost the maximum range possible, what a GBU-24 Paveway 3 weapon system could do. We're below 25,000 feet to activate our lantern, which was a limitation of the Tomcat at the time. We were going to be at such speed that we were going to get almost max range, which if it's unclassified, it's about 11-mile range that a GBU-24 can travel, because once you release it, the spring-loaded wings come out, and now it goes into a glide profile. Now, obviously, the weapon slows down. It's not jet propelled. It's just got the kinetic energy from your airplane and potential energy from the altitude that you give it. So you are going to accelerate out in front of it. Now, here's the other interesting thing. The GBU-24, even with the upgraded avionics that were in the F-14A, we had a programmable tactical information display in the back seat. We referred to that as the big screen. The masking curve for where the lantern had to look so that you didn't mask the window to put the laser spot down was not accurate inside the airplane. So you had to do this with your own stubby pencil math, and we had to fly a very exact S profile, kind of a big left turn, then a sweeping move to the right, so that we were directly overhead the target when the weapon got there from, a little bit more than 10 miles away when we released it. Laser on the entire way. And of course, just because it's the fog of war and dynamics, as we're making our way into the target, by the way, my airplane was perfect. My lantern pod was working the whole way. I was able to find the target well before release. I kind of had my whole situation suitcased. I am looking directly at Dell's lantern pod, which is, like about 5 feet away from me underneath his right wing. And the whole thing is just like you see in the Top Gun movie. It's doing this kind of lazy eye, rolling around. So I know his lantern pod's not working. So I might have to, in the middle of this thing, now just hope that he gets a weapon off, or maybe if we just put one in, we may have to revert to just putting the single weapon down into the middle of this bunker. Wouldn't get the same effect, but it would certainly rattle their cage. About 10 seconds prior to release, he fixes his lantern pod, and I see it lock on. Again, we're not doing this with any communications. And at the exact moment of our planned release, his GBU-24 comes off. And I got to tell you, it scared the crap out of me because it's just so damn big. And I watched the wings deploy. And of course, we got our weapon off at the right exact moment. So now we're really on government time. We're no longer flying 6 inches apart. We spread out, but we got to go through this S maneuver, and we're very predictable. And by the way, we are getting shot at. So there are bullets and things flying by us, and we cannot maneuver to avoid anything that's coming at us because we've got to put the laser on and keep it on that spot for a very, very long time.
Let's talk about the workload at Pickle between the two cockpits, because it's truly a two-person airplane here to deliver this weapon.
It is. So the pilot has the pickle that drops the weapon. The back seat has the lantern hand control, which is on the left console. It's a stationary thing that kind of fixes your hand. It's got about 20 points between your fingers that you touch that do everything from designate the target to actually having the trigger that activates the laser that comes out of the lantern pod. Really important. So that laser sends out a coded message that is directly linked to your weapon only. And there were multiple ways that you can deliver this, obviously. We chose to get the maximum penetration. So by putting in a 10-mile glide profile, this GBU-24, which has got a 2,000-pound weapon attached to all these wings and the seeker head, it glides slowly from your altitude to a point where it will hit a tip over to reach terminal velocity. And for your audience, we're talking terminal velocity. It's about 120 miles an hour for this type of weapon, translate to about 900 feet per second when it hits the ground, when it's not obstructed. If it's going to go through concrete, rock, typically it's going to go maybe somewhere between 30 and 40 feet in. In this case, we knew we had to get more like 60 feet in, but we had the advantage of going through the vent line, which could allow the second weapon to go all the way through into the open space. So pretty amazing tactic. Again, weaponeered by ourselves and highly successful. The pilot up front is actually spending more time worried about the air-to-air threat, also looking out for all of the surface-to-air threats as well as air-to-air threats. So it was kind of like the beginning of what the F-18F Super Hornet really became with the AESA radar, where you could share air-to-ground and air-to-air, almost like split cockpit. This is a little bit more manual in the F-14. And remember, these are F-14As that were 27, 28 years old. So pretty remarkable mission to accomplish in 1999.
Well, you mentioned the Super Hornet and the F model. So this cruise, the Kosovo campaign, and what you did over southern Iraq, well, actually, this mission was not southern Iraq, over middle Iraq, sort of led to the forging of the notion that we needed a two-seat version of the Super Hornet. So talk to us about how your success informed that decision.
Because of the weather that we were seeing in Kosovo, there were a lot of clouds and a lot of storms. We were developing tactics that we didn't leave with when we left for deployment. I mean, we're talking about buddy lasing capabilities, doing things without through the weather weapons. So by the time we got back with thousands and thousands of missions and thousands of hours of footage showing what a two-cockpit fighter bomber could do, the Navy rethought about making sure that we had at least one F-18F squadron on board every aircraft carrier, which had not been the plan up to that point. So this deployment for VF-14 and 41, I would argue, kind of preserved the future of the weapons systems officer, particularly with the forward air controller mission, which is truly you see the Air Force and some squadrons do it with a single seat. It's almost impossible to do as a single seat as a forward air controller. So we did quite a bit of that as well in Kosovo.
Lantern, as we've said on the channel before, was a massive game changer. And as you mentioned, that 10 by 10 resolution PTID made the Tomcat the weapon of choice, because if you were like hit the command post and not the mosque, you wanted Lantern and that PTID resolution. You didn't want the lightning pod, which was kind of like watching a fuzzy TV with rabbit ears compared to the resolution of the Lantern pod.
When our weapons did exactly as we had designed them to do, hit the center of the command bunker, and my GBU-24 goes down the vent line, what it looks like in the movie is exactly what it looked like in real life. There's an explosion, weapon goes in deep, and then an implosion. And I want to tell you, when I saw the movie for the first time, I did not know that they were referencing this mission, and it really took me by surprise. Now, I have confirmed with some of the folks that worked on the movie that this is where they took some of that video. Remarkably well done in the movie.
The other parallel to the movie, and this is related by Slammer, your XO, is they were monitoring the mission, this very high-profile mission at the command post, and there were high fives and cheers when you guys pulled it off in the command post, not unlike what happens in Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, it was a very high profile. I would tell you that if we hadn't had the 55 days of experience in Kosovo, I'm not so sure we would have pulled this off, because it was that difficult of a tactic, and it had to be done exactly right, and it was. So yeah, the previous experience, combat experience, really paid off.
Slapshot, you're a very busy man. Thank you for sharing the consecutive miracles, the real consecutive miracles mission with us.
Mooch, it's always good to be with you. Love being able to talk about naval aviation, and I really love what you do on your channel.
Well, we look forward to talking to you again soon. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.